Jupiter Hammon was born into slavery on Saturday, October 17th, 1711, at the Lloyd Manor in Queens Village, Long Island, which at that time was a separate city of its own and not yet part of New York City. The only information we have about his parents, according to a set of records called the Lloyd Papers, is that his father, who was called Opium, and his mother, who was called Rose, was documented as being the first set of male and female slaves to be purchased for servitude by the Lloyd family. His father was known for his many escape attempts, and outside of that, nothing else is mentioned or documented about his parents. By the time Jupiter Hammon is 14 years old, there's an estimated 75,000 African slaves in the American colonies out of 500,000 non-Native American residents. And although we know little to nothing about his childhood or early adult years, we do know that Hammon was raised to be a committed Christian in the likes of the Lloyd's family, whom he served. At some point, the Lloyd's family allowed Hammon to receive a rudimentary education through a religious organization known as the Anglican Church's Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, also known as SPG. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts was a Church of England missionary organization founded in 1701 by Reverend Thomas Bray. This organization sent Anglican clergymen and religious literature to the British colonies. It supported schoolmasters and establishment of new churches and lobbied for a more expansive place for the Church of England in Britain's growing empire. Its other goals were dedicated toward converting Native Americans and free as well as enslaved Africans to the Christian ideology. These activities in North America ceased with the establishment of an independent United States in 1783 in the aftermath of the American Revolution. Owned throughout 4 generations of the Lloyd family, Jupiter Hammon, armed with an education and strong religious values, was a favorite servant, clerk, farmhand, and artisan in the Lloyd family business. His ability to read and write proved useful to his slave masters as it related to their commercial business. Due to limited information, I can't tell you exactly when he began writing poetry. However, when he did, Jupiter Hammon displayed a high level of intellectual awareness. He was able to safely create literature expressing his feelings on slavery by layering his message in metaphors and symbols. This became evident when on Christmas Day, at the age of 49, he wrote a poem titled An Evening Thought, The Salvation by Christ with Penitential Cries, composed by Jupiter Hammon, a Negro belonging to Mr. Lloyd of Queens Village on Long Island, the 25th of December, 1760. Whew, that's a long title. The poem appeared as a broadside in 1761 when he was 50 years old. Now, most people are under the impression that Phyllis Wheatley, an extremely talented slave from Massachusetts, was the first published African author in the United States. However, her first published book of poetry was published in London and not America, making Jupiter Hammon the first African American published in America. Now, with that said, he was a huge fan of Phyllis Wheatley, and in fact, many years after his first published poem, during the Revolutionary War, Henry Lloyd would move his family and all of his slaves from Long Island to Hartford, Connecticut to evade British forces. Hammon was such an admirer of Phyllis Wheatley that despite never meeting her, she would be the inspiration for his second work to appear in print, which was titled An Address to Miss Phyllis Wheatley. He was in the hopes that his dedication poem would encourage Wheatley along her Christian journey. In 1778, Jupiter Hammon published a piece called The Kind Master and Dutiful Servant, a poetical dialogue, followed in 1782 by a poem for children with thoughts on death. These works would set the tone for Hammon's most notable work to date, a speech known as the Hammon Address, which was titled An Address to Negroes in the State of New York. Hammon delivered his message in 1786 at the inaugural meeting of the African Society in New York on September 24th at the age of 76. He was still a slave. He told the crowd that if we should ever get to heaven, we shall find nobody to reproach us for being black or for being slaves. He advised those who were slaves to be obedient to their masters and honest, upholding their Christian ideals despite the wretched circumstance of the black people in those times. Hammon also stated that while he himself had no desire to be free, he did wish that others, especially the young negroes, were freed. According to Paul Royster, an editor for the University of Nebraska-Lincolns, Hammon's speech was initially published by the New York Quakers and was later reprinted by several groups opposed to slavery, including the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, because the strong religious motifs and ideas of gradual emancipation were moderate enough to be taken seriously by whites, but still firmly rooted in abolition. I'll leave a link to that article below. Hammon's full body of work includes 8 publications, 4 poems and 4 prose, all consisting of religious content. Hammon's death was not recorded. It is believed that he died within or before the year of 1806 and was buried separately from the Lloyds on the Lloyds family property in an unmarked grave. Today, there can be a lot of different opinions formed looking back at the character of Jupiter Hammon and whether or not his ideology was to the benefit or detriment of enslaved black people throughout the 1700s. Some may feel that he was a house Negro who encouraged black slaves to accept a life of servitude and obedience, while others may feel that he was just a man of the cloth who believed that everything that was going on around him, including being enslaved, was the will of God. Wherever your opinion may fall, he was definitely the first African American to have his works published in the United States of America. He made it clear that although he took no ills to being a slave, he understood the plight of those who did not share his feelings toward that situation and expressed his hope that they would be freed, just as long as they committed to their Christian values. And I ask that when you remember him in history, consider the fact that he was a man who had been born into slavery, and as that goes, he was uncommonly allowed to learn to read and write, giving him a certain quality of life that most slaves at that time were unable to attain. I also ask you to consider that only 6 years before he was born, the Black Code of 1705 was signed into law in Virginia, restricting the travel of enslaved persons and naming them officially as real estate. It read in part, all servants imported and brought into the country who were not Christian in their native country shall be accounted and be slaves. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves within this dominion shall be held to be real estate. If any slave resist his master correcting such slave, and shall happen to be killed in such correction, the master shall be free of all punishment, as if such accident never happened. So with being born into this system with no legal protections and raised to worship in blind faith, he may have had a distorted sense of his own humanity. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed the information, please like and subscribe to the channel and be sure to hit the bell notification so that you don't miss any of my future videos. My name is John Austin Green III, and this is The Art of the Struggle.